A lot of us like to think that education is neutral. It is not. Your children are either being taught to fear God or to fear idols. My name is Lennox Kalafungwa, and this is Ordinary Gentlemen, where we endeavor to master the art of masculinity by building the virtues of strength, wisdom, and responsibility for the honor of God. Welcome back for another episode, gentlemen. It's always good to have you here. And today we're going to be dealing with an all-important subject of what it means to be a faithful father. What are some of the characteristics of a faithful father? What is it that fathers do that would qualify them to be called faithful in their duty of raising their children? I'm privileged to have two children of my own, and I really want to be the best kind of father I can be to them. And this requires me to be diligent in studying what it actually means and what it actually looks like to be a faithful father. And so I'm sort of letting you into some of the lessons that I have learned about what faithful fatherhood means and what faithful fatherhood looks like. And the first thing I want to say is this: faithful fathers are those who are motivated by love. Faithful fathers are motivated by love. First and foremost, they're motivated by a love for God. Right? They have their worship rightly ordered. They know who they are in being image bearers of God and those who have received mercy and grace from God, and therefore seek to obey and honor God in everything that they do. So faithful fathers are motivated by a love for God. Essentially, it is God who calls men to a mission. And therefore, the standard of whether we're being faithful or not is really God Himself. Are we being faithful to what He has called us to be? Are we being faithful to what He has called us to do? So, if we are not loving God, we cannot be said to be people who are faithful. And so, gentlemen, if we're going to get this right in being faithful fathers, we must be motivated by a love for God. But here's the thing. When we truly love God in a way that is right, we're then enabled to love others in the best possible way. Our love for God is the foundation for our love for others. If we're going to love others correctly, we must love God first. But when we do love God, we ought to love others. And in this context, we ought to be full of love for our children. Now, I want to make a very important point here. Love is not something that we define ourselves. Love is not just some subjective, great, sensational feeling that we have towards others. Love is actually principled. Love is actually lawful. And therefore, it is God and God alone who determines what love is and what love looks like. Therefore, we're not the ones who set the terms on what it looks like to love God, and we're not even the ones who set the terms on what it looks like to love others. And in this context, we're not the ones who set the terms on what it looks like to love our children. God alone does. God is the one who has actually called us to a specific task, to a specific way of raising our children. And if we're going to be faithful in raising them, we must be faithful in understanding what it means to love them in the way that God commands us to love them. Faithful fathers are diligent. Faithful fathers are diligent. They're those who work very hard, day in and day out, in loving their children. And I want you to consider this. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, which is one of my favorite passages in the Bible, you see this mandate that's given to fathers to raise their children in a specific way, and this requires diligence. I believe it's verse 7 of Deuteronomy chapter 6, which actually says that fathers ought to be diligent in the way that they raise their children. This means fathers ought to have a very good work ethic when it comes to raising their children. Fatherhood is not something we put on at some points in the day and then turn off at other points of the day. This is something that we should continuously be striving to do as men, consistently raising our children to fear God. And that requires diligence. With a poor work ethic, it's going to be very difficult to raise children in a way that will be pleasing to the Lord. So consider that, men. Faithful fathers are those who are diligent. Faithful fathers are those who are exemplary disciplers. I'll say that again. Faithful fathers are those who are exemplary disciplers. This means that they go about living their lives and teaching in their homes their children what it means to fear the Lord. Right? They're teaching them through everything that they do what it means to fear the Lord. And at this point, I just want to suggest a few ways that you as a father can disciple your children to fear the Lord. And the first thing I want to suggest to you is this: family worship. We'll probably have a topic on family worship on its own at some point, but family worship is you gathering your family together so that you can worship God together. You can open the Bible together. You can pray together. You can sing songs of praise to God. And in so doing, your children are learning who God is and what He requires of them. So family worship is something that should be happening very frequently. It's not meant to be something that happens once in a while. This is something that ought to be happening very frequently. If you can do this every day, that would be even better. Day in and day out, make a practice of leading your family in worship. That is a great way you can disciple your children. You can disciple your children, and you can do this through family worship as well, is catechizing them, right? Teaching them sound doctrine through catechisms. And catechisms are very special. They're a very important and wonderful way to teach your children what it means to fear the Lord, right? Catechisms are usually done in the form of questions and answers. And basically, by working through each question and each answer with your children, they are learning to develop not only a knowledge of what they actually believe, but they're actually able to answer questions others may have of the Christian faith. And so catechize your children. It'll only strengthen their faith and their knowledge of who God is. Read books, right? Read books to your children. Read all kinds of books to them. Read books that will enable them to think, enable them to imagine, enable them to or motivate them to become better people. Read biographies, read church history, read all kinds of books that you think would be beneficial for the growth of your children. Reading books is, in fact, a form of discipleship, fathers, and it's one of the things that, if we harness well, can be a wonderful tool in helping our children grow rightly. Another thing I want to suggest to you in terms of ways that we can disciple children is by displaying to them a good marriage, right? Displaying to them a good marriage. When your children see your marriage, what is it that they actually see about God? What does your marriage illustrate to your children about what love looks like, about what sacrifice looks like? What does your marriage tell your children about what you believe about who God is and how He has loved us? All right, this is very important because marriage is actually one of the ways that God illustrates His love for us. As a man loves his bride, his wife, he is illustrating how Christ loves the church. Right? So basically, your marriage is an illustration to your children of Christ's love for His church. So by investing in a good marriage, you're actually investing in the discipleship of your children, who then have a better understanding of what it means to be the bride of Christ and what it means for Christ to have loved us even while we were still sinners. And this is very important. This is not one of those things we ought to cast aside. We can actually be faithful disciplers just by our example of being good husbands to our wives. Right? Keep that in mind, gentlemen. You can actually disciple your children through your vocation. As they see you work, what are they learning about work? Are they learning to work with a joyful disposition? Are they learning to work with competence? Are they learning to work as unto the Lord? Do they see you keeping appointments on time? Do they see you putting in excellent work and really adding aesthetical value to everything that you do? What are you showing them through your work how to honor God in our vocations? Essentially, we're teaching our children as well, discipling them to one day be workers. And what are we showing them as we work? Are we showing them a way that we can be ethical in our work? For example, if you're in a tough situation at work where you're being pressured to do something wrong, are you using those moments as an opportunity to teach your children what it looks like to do the right thing, even in the face of adversity? Gentlemen, it's interesting that even through our vocation and work, we can disciple our children to be those who fear the Lord, right? That's such an amazing opportunity. So you don't have to think of your work as separate from your fatherhood. You can actually use your work to be a great example of a faithful father in your homes. Another way that you can disciple your children is just in the way that you speak, right? What kind of words do you use? Are you using words that's helping them develop their rhetoric, develop their language? Are you one who misuses words and takes the Lord's name in vain, right? Even through the way you speak, the words you use, the things you choose to talk about, through that you can disciple your children. So men, we need to be those who are concerned with our own speech, asking ourselves the question, what are my children learning from my speech? What are your children learning through rest and leisure? Right? We talked about having a good work ethic. I think we also need to have a good rest ethic as men. All right? We have a lot of men who are good at violating the fourth commandment of God's moral law, to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Are we men, are we fathers who are discipling our children in teaching them how to honor the Sabbath day, how to rest, how to have leisure, how to be entertained? Or is that one of those things that we just don't really think about? And I think in more cases, that's likely the prominent practice for men to just sit back and be passive in teaching their children what it means to rest and what it means to enjoy leisure. I also want to talk about the importance of education in discipling your children. A lot of people don't understand the fact that education is in fact a form of discipleship. A lot of us like to think that education is neutral. It is not. Your children are either being taught to fear God or to fear idols, and there's nothing in between. There's no neutral ground there. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, it's just language, it's just English, it's just history, it's just science. But we don't really realize that all these disciplines are taught from some sort of presupposition. There's always some philosophical backdrop in how these subjects are taught. And we've seen how the world has used media and education to advance their propaganda, to advance their agenda, trying to destroy things, trying to undermine the family unit itself. And so as men, we need to be concerned about what kind of education our children are on. And I'm going to challenge you with this, men. If the education system your children are in is not teaching them to fear God, they are being taught to fear idols. So ask yourself whether you're really investing in your child's fear of God, whether you're investing in your child being able to glorify God in all disciplines of life. Or is education one of those things you're not very intentional about, you don't really care about? Maybe your goal as a father is to just have your kids gain wealth and affluence and little else. Well, the sad thing there is if your child grows up to be very successful with a lot of affluence, but they live very unethical and immoral lives, you would have to say that your project is still very successful, right? Because you weren't investing in the fear of God. You weren't investing in them being who God wants them to be. You wanted them to look good in the eyes of the world. You wanted them to live very comfortable lives that you might be able to benefit from as well. So what are your priorities as a father? Can you say that you have used education as a means of discipleship for your children? Because this really does matter. So those are just a few ways, few suggestions that I wanted to offer you in terms of how men can disciple their children in their homes. But there's one thing I want to say, one more thing I want to say about what it means to be a faithful father. And that's the fact that faithful fathers are those who think in a multi-generational fashion. I think because we live in a world of instant gratification, we're always thinking of immediate returns and immediate payoffs. But throughout Scripture, you see that faithful fathers are those who are not just concerned about convenience for their time. They're thinking about what they can do to influence multiple generations of their posterity. They want to be able to raise their own children to fear God and raise their own children to then be fathers who go and teach their own children how to fear God. You want to be able to see this multi-generational rollout of people who fear God because of your faithfulness. So faithful fathers are those who think multi-generationally. I remember before I had children of my own, it was so easy to just think of myself. When I had children, I started to think bigger. It wasn't just about me anymore. And I'm already trying to think ahead, trying to anticipate having grandchildren one day and thinking, what can I do to be of influence to them even now? What can I be doing in my parenting now that would influence multiple generations of my posterity? So according to the Bible, faithful fathers have this multi-generational vision. They desire to see multi-generational faithfulness take place. And so as a man, I want to challenge you to think in this regard, to think about what it really means to be faithful fathers. It's through our faithful patriarchy that the Lord will bless our homes, that the Lord will bless our republics and nations, that the Lord will bless everything that we do. So gentlemen, it is my prayer that we would be fathers who are found faithful rather than wanting.